Avery, whose show is this? And we're live. Welcome, everybody, here to the Lakers Lounge Podcast. I'm Anthony Irwin, Senior Lakers Insider for Clutch Points, joined by Jovan Buha, the People's Insider. Jovan, it has been a long-ass time since you and I recorded. Nothing really has happened that I can think of. No real big stories, just kind of, nice, quiet summer. How you holding up?
It's been an interesting summer. I'm holding up well, though, and I'm sure we have a few things to talk about.
We do. We aren't going to, like yesterday's episode with Matt, we talked about philosophy and utilitarianism and all of that stuff. He wanted to get deep into the ethics of professional sports. I don't think Jovan and I are going to be talking about that.
Probably not.
But we are going to be talking about this recent slew of rumors that has hit recently of the Lakers now being in win now mode. Dan Wojcicki reporting that it had to do with the way that Luka Doncic played in Eurobasket and him inking his contract. I have a couple questions stemming from that. See if Jovan has been hearing some of the same stuff as well. We'll also link that back to some of the noise that I heard from earlier this summer. And I think we can kind of paint a picture using all of that information. So we'll do that in the first kind of part of the show, for most of the show, frankly, because there are, I think, branches of that conversation that are more impactful than Wiggins in particular. We also have to continue to talk about this Kawhi Leonard Clippers thing. Jovan used to cover the Clippers, so I have some questions about that and those dastardly Clippers. And we'll see what else comes up along the way. But yeah, Jovan, I wanted to start with this. We had Mark Stein over the last week or so report that the Lakers could be interested in Andrew Wiggins. We had Dan Wojcicki just recently report that of The Athletic. Report that the Lakers are now interested in Andrew Wiggins. According to Wojcicki, they were not interested in Wiggins before. I had heard that they were, and that they had kind of feeler conversations with the Heat on that situation earlier this summer. Without getting into the weeds of like reporting and who said what, and we all have different people that we talk to, but what do you make of this now becoming a story? This now picking up steam randomly in the middle of September?
I find the timing as the most interesting part of this, to your point. I believe we both had reported various versions of conversations or feelers with the Lakers and the Heat earlier in the summer. And there was some pushback, I guess, guessing from the Lakers side to try and downplay their interest in Wiggins or for whatever reason. But at the time, I reported that I was hearing the price was astronomically high. And because of that, the Lakers were not interested in it. So if anything, it made the Miami side, I think, look worse if we're kind of judging like which side came out of that situation kind of looking worse, which matters. The optics always matter to the teams. So I think there's like a controlling the narrative part of this, of now the Lakers want to admit that they were interested in Andrew Wiggins when this has been, I think, a bit of a dance going back for a few months now. But I also wonder how much of the Eurobasket situation plays into it, where Luka just lost, Slovenia just lost, and maybe they didn't want this to be a storyline or distraction because, again, the timing is interesting of referencing Luka is now signed for multiple years, but he signed over 5 weeks ago. So it's like, why was this not coming out immediately after Luka extends? And then it's Luka wants Andrew Wiggins, Luka wants a two-way upgrade. The Lakers are now, because Luka has extended, because he has committed, they are now going to do everything in their power to get him that type of upgrade. It feels like they maybe just wanted to avoid this being a storyline or distraction, and maybe during the last 4 or 5 weeks, they've been doing their research or trying to see like what's out there, and then now they're comfortable with it coming to light. But I think anytime you have kind of the same reporting coming out in the same week, couple days apart, like it does feel like this is intentional, right? That they want this out there. Now, whether they can strike a deal in the next 2.5 weeks before training camp starts, before media day, that remains to be seen. I still think the most likely outcome is them going into the season with this roster and then making some type of trade between like late December and early February. But it is interesting that they are willing to potentially be more aggressive on the trade market, take on longer term money. And that it seems like, to some extent, Luka is involved in pushing this forward, whether it's an ask or a demand. I can't speak to, but it feels like Luka's putting a little bit of pressure here.
Yeah, so what I found interesting back at the time when the initial report, not initial, but some of the reporting over the summer was that the Lakers are kind of maintaining their flexibility. They have the Giannis plan or the Jokic plan and all of that stuff. My theory, honestly, I think the one that I keep coming back to most is that some of the word out there is that Giannis isn't going anywhere, and that Jokic, I think even to a greater extent, isn't going anywhere. And I think a pivot might be taking place. And I think they're just kind of like preparing themselves for that. And some of those conversations have made their way to the public now. The other theory I have in the notion of Luka applying some pressure here, I think Luka obviously had an incredible tournament. He was, in my opinion, the best player in that tournament, from start to finish, or from his start to his finish. And I kind of felt like he finished that tournament and said, "I'm feeling good." Like he has this new regiment, and he's lost all this weight. He looks, like rookie Luka almost. He's going by guys. He's getting to the rim. He's getting to the free throw line. He's making his free throws. He's hitting catch and shoot threes. He was incredible. He was honored, Jovan, for his defense. Eurobasket tweeted out that he was like one of the top defenders there. And I was like, not the Onion. And so it's been a fantastic, tournament for him. And I think it's altogether possible. Another thing that could have come of that is Luka finishing that tournament and being like, I feel good. We got to go for it while I feel this way. LeBron also looks great. One of the things that I've been hearing throughout the summer is that LeBron and Luka have been in contact, especially at the beginning of the summer, right after they were eliminated, about how they can play better together. We had LeBron put on Instagram, right, how Luka was dominating. And it kind of makes me think that, like, you have Luka on a relative discount. You have Austin on a discount. He's about to get paid next season. You have Ayton on a discount. You have Smart on a discount. I think he's looking around at the situation just like you and I have, frankly, for most of the summer, and saying, this is a pretty good opportunity here. And I think that's where a lot of this noise has kind of come from.
That would make a lot of sense. I still think, like, regardless of how well he played at Eurobasket, there should have still been some more urgency with trying to make some sort of trade happen, right? So I feel like it's a little convenient to after the fact come out and be like, well, he looks so good, and now we kind of have to do it. Or but I mean, maybe it was I said this. I have a mailbag coming out actually in like 40 minutes, and I talk about like the sliding scale of like superstar pressure, right? So there's like an ask or like a suggestion, and then there's like a demand, right? And it's like can have the same impact, but obviously it depends on like just how the person is and how they want to conduct business. So again, I don't know where this is coming from necessarily, but like I would assume some form of Luka suggesting or asking for a Wiggins type or some type of two-way, because I think I continue to like the two biggest holes on the roster for me, in my opinion, are I still think they need a better two-way starting option that slots. I think Rui and Rui, at least on this roster, I think there are some rosters where Rui could start. And like I've talked about, like Minnesota or OKC. I think there are, if you've got a certain level of center defense and like wing defense, you could start Rui as your 4. But the Lakers don't have that. So with regard to this roster, I think Rui and Marcus Smart are both better off of the bench in an ideal roster construction. So that's where a guy like a Wiggins or someone of that ilk, to me, they need that type of player as the 5th starter. And then I still think the backup center spot is a bit concerning, and unless Maxi Kleber, like the Maxi Kleber buzz, plays out and he's as good as maybe some people are hoping. So, with exception to those 2 things, like I think this is a pretty good roster, and they're going to be in the mix for a top 4 seed in the West and be a contender to at least went around. So I think if they can find, like, I just did a bold prediction on my show earlier this week, and like I think if they make the right trade, including potentially the Wiggins trade, I think they're right there in the like true contender mix with OKC and Denver and Houston and Cleveland, and I think they're right there in that inner circle.
I want to go back to a point that you made a second ago about like the urgency that they should have had all summer, and because to me this is the part that didn't quite line up, is this notion that and I want to be absolutely clear. I like Dan personally. He's a good dude. None of us have any problem. Like I'm just asking some questions that I think are natural coming from some of the reporting and the angles that come from this. So none of this, if I'm questioning some of the angles, it's not questioning Dan personally or his reporting. He's very well plugged in. He's a good dude. I have zero problem with Dan whatsoever. The only question, or one of the questions that I have, is, again, with some of the framing of, okay, it has to do, or this new ramped up effort to win now and take on this openness to take on longer term money, stemming from the way that Luka looked in Eurobasket, and or the him signing his extension and how that has changed things. One, the Lakers never signaled any concern that Luka wasn't going to sign his extension. All offseason, that was always the case. Everybody around the league that I spoke to said that was pretty much an open and door shut, open and shut door case. Easy for me to say. And then it turns out he signs his extension the very first morning that he could possibly sign it. There was zero drama on that front. So I don't think the Lakers were ever actually operating as like, well, we can't take on longer term money because if Luka doesn't sign, then we're screwed. That doesn't quite add up to me, given how some of that played out. And then the other one too, we were talking about this in the lounge Slack yesterday, and it's like, if you have any concern that Luka is who we saw he was in these last playoffs, where he was sick, he was still kind of coming off of that calf thing. He didn't play to his level in that series, his typical level in that series against Minnesota. And if you think that's who he is, well, then that's a much different conversation beyond like whether or not what you think of LeBron and where he's at in his career. Like, if you don't believe that Luka can win you a championship, then you should be trying to move Luka. It would be the Nico thing. So that didn't quite square up to me either. And that kind of lack of urgency, or potential lack of urgency in waiting for this. Do you get the sense, or do you think there was anything that they could have done that now it's kind of tricky this close to camp for them to do? Because that's the only thing that I kind of wondered about as a result of this reporting, was like, wait, does this mean that there was things that they could have done that they have pulled the trigger on a Wiggins trade before and now can't because Miami had their offseason already?
I don't think with the Wiggins trade they could have necessarily, like, I think they could have done something, but I think the price, again, the price that I reported I was hearing was something along the lines of Rui Hachimura, Dalton Connect, and a first round pick. And that is just too much to give up for Andrew Wiggins. I think I would do a variation of two of those three things. I think the preference, if I'm the Lakers, is Rui and Dalton. I would consider maybe Rui and a protected first, maybe make that lottery protected, top 15 protected, whatever, or top 20 protected. Like you can play with the protections there. I think Rui and an unprotected first is too much. And again, I think the preference should be something along the lines of Rui and Dalton. So I think if they were willing to overpay, they could have done something with Wiggins specifically. Now, to other things, I've heard different things about different options that were presented around free agency that I'm not going to share or whatever. But like there were things of potential sign and trade opportunities or whatever that could have been longer term things that they weren't interested in. That so I guess that there maybe were some things they passed up on. I think the bigger thing that they passed up on that is possible around the trade deadline, but I just think it would have been better to have built the roster now compared to waiting. Is like you could have done something with Gabe Vincent and or Maxi Kleba and trying to dump those guys and create some more flexibility to even keep a Jordan Goodwin or just sign a minimum guy. Like there was a lot
Dorian.
Could have kept
like
Dorian. Well, that's a more complicated matter, but yeah, there's a lot of good vet minimum free agents that like I think like comparing some of these guys for like 3 million versus like Gabe for 11 or Maxi for 11. I would rather have the player that is arguably just as good or similar on a $3 million contract. So yeah. I think the maybe salary dump is the thing that they missed out on and can still do closer to the trade deadline. I just think, it gets, they are in this mode of not making moves in the offseason and then waiting until a couple months before the deadline to try and build the roster, which I just think has some real downsides in terms of continuity and chemistry and the group having a sample size together.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And look, I mentioned Dorian a second ago. I think he's a good example of how Rob Pelinka kind of prefers to do his business, where prices are set at a certain level in the offseason. And then you get to the regular season and seasons play out how they're going to play out. And over the course of that season, that price drops lower and lower and lower and lower. And as soon as Rob felt that he could land Dorian Finney-Smith without giving up a first-round pick, boom, he makes that quick move and he brings in Dorian Finney-Smith. And I actually think that's a decent example for how I think Rob would like to see this play out with whether it's Wiggins or any other wing here, where like, let's say, and I think we can assume this fairly safely. Let's say the current price on Andrew Wiggins is Rui, the first round pick, Dalton, and Gabe. And let's say that, because I wouldn't pay all that for Andrew Wiggins I'm not really interested in trading Rui, the younger, cheaper player, for Wiggins and having to give up. I do believe Wiggins is better, but the younger, cheaper part of it matters too. I wouldn't give up a first round pick to just get Andrew Wiggins there. Pick swap, maybe second round draft compensation. I'm open to, but I wouldn't give up Rui and a first rounder for Wiggins personally. And then if you go into the regular season and Miami isn't, say, as good as they think that they could be, and they, get closer and closer and closer to the deadline, and, the Knicks are just that much better than they are, or the Cavs are just that much better than they are, Milwaukee is just that much better than they are. At the deadline, maybe you revisit those conversations, or closer to the deadline, you revisit those conversations, and you can get Wiggins potentially there, depending on what other moves the Lakers make to that point. But there is a world here where you could land Wiggins without giving up Rui or without giving up the first round pick. And, I think it's good business to hold out and see what you can do there. Or if you can get a different wing, because Wiggins isn't the only 3-and-D wing out there. Like, there are other wings that,
that's a big point that you're hitting on, that I think is the big thing from this, is that what I've been talking about has been like the Venn diagram of the player they've been trying to find has been they want this like youngish, ideally a younger player who could grow with Luka and potentially Austin long term. So like someone, let's just say like 30 or younger, and 30s obviously on the older side, but under 30, and on like has all these skills of two-way player, 3-and-D wing, whatever, but then also only has like a year or two on their contract remaining, and is those players are valuable, so typically teams are not willing to just give those guys up. So they want that type of player with that skill set, with that type of contract, and they also want to not give up a first-round pick for that player. And like the Venn diagram of guys who check all those boxes and don't require a first-round pick is it's probably single digits. It might be one hand in terms of guy, and also like it fits within the contracts of Rui and Gabe and Maxey. So it's like I've done the exercise, go through every roster in the league, look at their cap sheet, and show me the two-way guy who a team would be willing to take on or give up for Rui and Gabe, Rui and Maxey, Gabe and Maxey. Maybe you throw in Dalton as like a sweetener and not require a first round pick. Like it's a short list of players. So if they're willing to take on longer term salary and expand that pool of players, that I think is interesting, because now all of a sudden I think that list grows to maybe 15, 20, 25 guys rather than like 7 guys. So Wiggins, and among the guys, I think Wiggins was near the top of the list of like realistic options. But again, if they're willing to take on guys with 3 years left, 4 years left, or they're about to be extension eligible, whatever, like that is interesting to me, because I think that opens up a different class and a different pool of players than they were looking at previously.
The other thing too that needs to be mentioned here is Rui has some allies very high in the organization. And I think ideally the Lakers would prefer to land this wing without giving up Rui. And I kind of see why. I think he is a useful player. I do believe that he was one of the few guys who was playing with actual force in the playoffs the last time we saw the Lakers. I think the Lakers were on their way to getting absolutely obliterated before Rui had that left-handed dunk in Game 5. But he had
that was a big play.
It was great, and I thought it woke up the building, kind of woke up the team. They wound up losing nonetheless, but regardless, I guess what I'll say is that there are people whose opinions really, really, really matter, who really, really like Rui. And this is where Rob's job gets complicated, because on one hand, he has Luka telling him, hey, I would like for us to make this win now move. I would like to go out and get this 3-and-D wing that Rui may not be. But then he also has to kind of toe that line or straddle that fence of, okay, we'll do that. But he also has other bosses telling him, yeah, but we would really prefer not to give up Rui. And that's where, if the Lakers operated differently, where your GM kind of had more of or your lead basketball decision maker would have more of a vision for these things rather than being more of an executor of the ideas that other people around the organization or on the team have, maybe you would have already made this move. So, I'm really curious to see how this plays out. And what's really interesting too is that like Rui does have those allies, but at no point this offseason was there any conversation about extending him, which I also find interesting. Have you heard anything on that front? I personally haven't heard a thing.
No, and I also think the Lakers have to be careful here with the Rui situation, because he is an expiring contract, and we have seen this team mismanage expiring contracts before. We have several examples of this. So like if the Lakers don't trade him, and it doesn't seem like they're going to come to an extension before the start of the season, or before the deadline, and if he's just an expiring contract and they don't end up trading him and they don't make a big, obviously if you can pull off Wiggins or someone else and keep Rui, I think that's the preferred outcome. But if it's a situation where you just don't make a move or don't make a big move and just keep Rui and stand pat, he could just walk next summer, and it's another asset that I think you. There's always the opportunity cost equation, right? And you got to know what is potentially out there for you next summer, and that's something you got to do your due diligence on. But if it's between having Wiggins on the roster next year or just Rui leaving, and all of a sudden, maybe LeBron retires or whatever, and you have all this cap space, but it's not a great free agent class. Like, it's better than this past free agency, but not like there isn't the big sexy name that you want. And I don't think I don't know if you're rebuilding your roster in the best way per se with free agency next summer. So it's like, I think they have to weigh the opportunity cost too of not potentially trading him. And if you're not going to extend him, if you don't view him as a long-term piece, if you can flip him for a long-term piece who also fits better, I think that's a win-win. So, but no, I did not hear anything about them potentially extending him. So I think it just, they're in a weird spot with it. And really, just to be clear, like, I think Rui's a good player, and I think he's grown a lot as a player in LA. I think really the thing working against him is that the two best players on the team play the same position as him defensively, and there's a limitation, and he just doesn't have the scalability to scale down to guard like threes and twos. I think he's gotten better at it, and there have been some matchups he's done well, but this is purely a fit thing. It has nothing to and offensively, the fit is really good. And I think as a shooter and a cutter, like, Rui fits in offensively. The issue is this group has not been good enough defensively post Luka trade, and they need to figure that out. So I think just from a fit perspective, there's some duplication there, some redundancy, and it's purely that. It has nothing to do with Rui specifically as a player.
Yeah, I ironically, Rui is the exact kind of acquisition that the Lakers would like to make, right? A wing, maybe that plays. He's a little smaller than Rui, this ideal player, but remember, they got Rui for a collection of second-round draft picks, and I think it was like Kendrick Nunn's expiring contract. He vastly outplayed that first contract that he was on, and he's grown as a player, and he's, developed, and they would like to see that play out just with a player who can guard twos and threes instead of threes and fours. Last thing here before we move on, this notion of taking on longer-term money, it has always made the most sense, because the top assets that the Lakers have, I would argue, that is most realistically movable are those expiring contracts. I would even argue they might have too many expiring contracts. And one of the things I'm a little nervous about is how many guys are going to be playing for their next contract versus for the interests of the team. But still, it's like you have all of these expiring contracts, and they are only worth anything if you are willing to take on a good player on a longer contract than a team would be comfortable paying that player. And I guess, to me, more importantly than Andrew Wiggins specifically, or any of the wings that might fit that Venn diagram that you outlined a second ago, is this notion that finally they are interested in doing that. Because I think that opens the door to what you were talking about earlier about making them a true contender. I didn't see a path to being a true contender if they maintain that stance of cap flexibility next summer and the summers beyond it. I just didn't see that. That was limiting their options to an extent that I just didn't think was feasible. But now, if they are more interested and more open to taking on longer term money, I do see them as a viable championship contender at some point. I could see them as that this season. Does that change your math on that front in the same way that it did for me?
Yeah, and that's been my stance going back to the start of free agency, was like, once we saw how things played out, how the board played out, and I think they struck gold with the options that they had in terms of free agency with DeAndre Ayton and Marcus Smart and Jake LaRavia. I think they played that well, and they turned the DFS salary slot into multiple players. And I think this is I think this is the best offseason they've had since 2019. And there's a big caveat there with 2019. Obviously, they trade for AD. So even putting that aside, though, in terms of like building a coherent roster, I think this is the closest they've gotten since the 2019 summer. Like 2020, they had to carry over from the championship team, so they were bringing back a lot of that group, and they made some swap. And but we could also say they probably messed some of those things up with the Danny Green for Dennis trade and Marc Gasol and Montrezl Harrell versus JaVale and Dwight. So like I would say this to me is the best offseason they've had since 2019. So I think they are really close. Like I'm high on DeAndre Ayton. I'm high on Marcus Smart. I'm high on Jake LaRavia. I think all three of those guys give them things that they didn't necessarily have last year. And I think the missing piece is just that two-way wing. And you look at every team in the West that we would put in the top 5 or 6, and they all have at least one of those guys, if not 2 or 3. And I just think that's the missing piece for them. So if they can find that guy and potentially even add in a better backup, or maybe Christian Coloco continues to develop and he earns a roster spot at some point in the future, I think they're right there with, I don't think they're, even as constructed, I don't think they're that far behind. I just think defensively, one of the things I've been looking at is like what they can do with LeBron, Luka, and Austin together. And actually looking at the 3-man data, they had the league's best offense with those 3 on the floor together, but they also had the league's worst defense with those 3 on the floor together. So you're gonna, for as much as we can complain about maybe the process, the offensive organization, the 3-point shooting, whatever, offensively, Luka, LeBron, and Austin worked. There's data to support that. Like they were elite offensively with those 3 on the floor. It was the defensive end where they were awful, and they got to figure that out. And I think the way to figure that out, unless you're trading Austin and remaking your starting lineup, remaking your core, if you're keeping those 3 players, you need to supplement them with size and physicality, athleticism, and defense. And I don't think they're quite there yet. I still think they need one more move.
This is probably a topic for another show, but this just popped into my head while you were talking there about Reeves, specifically in the defense that the Lakers play when Reeves and Luka and LeBron are all on the court at the same time. I do think it'll be better this year. I think one of the big reasons that group really kind of suffered was because Jackson Hayes was their center and they really couldn't rebound. Ayton is a really good volume rebounder. LeBron's a great rebounder. Luka's a really good rebounder. And I think that turns a weakness into a strength defensively. But we just saw a bit of an about face on a stance that the Lakers had maintained, pretty hard line going into this offseason. We got an about face on that over the course of this offseason. And there are other hardline stances that we are absolutely not trading Austin Reeves. And I do kind of wonder if Luka applies the right pressure, if that kind of changes things too. And that's going to be one of the things that I'm really going to be paying attention. Not saying that Luka would stomp into the office and say, trade this guy right now. I don't think, I think Luka likes playing with Austin. I know Austin likes playing with Luka, but like, it does make me, watching them kind of have this about face this summer does make me wonder what's possible, if I should be rethinking what's possible going into next season. All right, let's really quickly segue over here before we get you out of here, Jovan, and talk about this Clippers thing, because I can't get enough of it. I almost never listen to other I listen to your show. I listen to LFR because we're all Odyssey, colleagues and stuff like that, and that's part of the gig. But I almost never listen to like other NBA shows and podcasts and stuff. I don't want to feel like I'm ripping people's takes off is my thing, and I can't stop listening to podcasts about this thing. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot with this Clippers situation is whether the Lakers should be rooting for Ballmer to, get another slap on the wrist. They're about to get a really, really rich owner, with much deeper pockets than Jeannie and the Buss family. They have all of these connections and sponsorships that they have. Jake Fisher wrote in his most recent column that other owners are basically saying, hey, if this guy gets off for this, that means cap circumvention really isn't the cardinal sin that we thought it was before. We're going to start doing that too. We could set up any number of shady LLCs. Should the Lakers, because it would give them such a crazy advantage, should the Lakers be rooting for Ballmer here?
No. Because it's yeah. I mean, I get it from an ownership and team perspective why you. I mean, you want to break the rules and get away with what you can get away with, and like rules are meant to be broken, right? It's just about can you get away with it, and can you like. I think even if they penalize the Clippers and even if they change some of the rules, which it seems like they'll probably have to after this, I still think owners will be 1 to 2 steps ahead and find different ways to this. I'll say has been like a pretty sloppy thing. Like if they did circumvent, which again right now it's an if, but like there's a lot that the house is on fire and there's smoke coming out of every window and like. It seems to be that way, but I just want to, like we'll see what the NBA ultimately finds or determines. But this has been an incredibly sloppy process. Like it was with a team sponsor, and you have like the exact amount that Steve Ballmer or close to the exact amount that he puts in is also somehow being rerouted to Kawhi. Then you have this situation that just came out of they're about to be late on a payment to Kawhi, and then they're putting that money. Like it was just right there. And obviously you had to go digging for it. And that's a huge testament to Pablo, who's been crushing it this year and doing real journalism. And like he's having like it's been the year of Pablo, but that is like insane to me at how like just brazen this was and how sloppy this was, this whole process. And at this point, I don't see how they don't get penalized with like at least a first round pick and a multi-million-dollar fine. I think that's the way we're headed at a minimum.
To be absolutely clear, I am not rooting for Steve Ballmer here. I've made that very clear over the course of this thing and stuff like that. It was just something that kind of popped into my head while I was talking about the ethics. Just being purely pragmatic, almost Machiavellian. Do you want the advantages that they would gain there? The thing that really kind of stuck out to me, and as you kind of hit on it there, is how brazen this was. It makes me think that the powers that be have gotten used to a lack of digging that takes place by those who should be digging, right? Whether it's journalism has really changed over the last few decades. I think the league itself, when they slap the wrist the one time with DeAndre Jordan back in 2015, the league's like, wait, that, or the Clippers seem to have said like, wait, that's it. That's all. Oh, okay. Like $250,000 to Steve Ballmer is like, making you buy an extra soda, like it's just nothing. And I think that's a great point is like how openly they flaunted these rules. And I was listening to Pablo on Ethan's podcast today, and he said that he would like to start kind of looking back. He's been so focused on Kawhi re-signing that he might go back and look at Kawhi signing with the Clippers in the first place. And it does kind of make me wonder, because, we got those reports, I think, from Bruce Arthur about what Kawhi asked of the Raptors back then. I know Sam Amick wrote about how the Lakers felt about things at the time when Kawhi signed with the Clippers in the first place. It's this situation where I think it's a reminder of how important real journalism is. And I kind of hope that it reminds everybody, myself included, that journalism isn't just, talking to an agent to see what kind of extension their client is going to sign. It's actually digging to speak truth to power from those who can really impact this stuff.
I also think the interesting thing with this story is it is such a Kawhi specific story, because I feel like if any other star were in Kawhi's shoes with this whole situation and they are getting all these demands of a no-show job or whatever else he demanded for and got some of the stuff we know, some of the stuff we might not know, whatever. it is so specific to Kawhi, because I think the thing, like, he just had to show up to like a press conference or a public event or tweet something out or do a little 2-minute video of why it's important for him with climate change or planting tree, you know, whatever. And he did not, like, that would have absolved all this, or you know, potentially some of these things would have come out maybe, and maybe there's like a smaller slap on the wrist. But the fact that he got, because I was looking into it, and at least from the numbers I could find, it looks like his New Balance deal is around like $5 million a year. So he was making more off of this than he was making from New Balance, and he's like the basketball face of New Balance, or at least at the time when they signed him, he was. So it's like, just thinking about that, like $7 million it's now we have our perception warped with money because of like the contracts, but like $7 million for an endorsement deal is a lot. That is more than most players' sneaker deals. And for him to do nothing, there's like no reasonable argument from the aspiration side of what is the value of them giving Kawhi Leonard $7 million to do no show work and not even have the partnership be publicized. Like, what, you're just giving him money for no apparent reason other than, well, you're a partner with the Clippers and they invested $50 million in you. And like, it just, there's too much, it smells too bad. There's too much smoke coming out of the house. And I just don't see how, again, I don't know if it's going to be Minnesota, Joe Smith level, but there's just way too much smoke with this whole situation that I don't see how they don't get I would say more than a slap on the wrist. I would say like a slap to the face at a minimum.
I just picture Adam Silver slapping Steve Ballmer in the face. But yeah, I part of this too is the embarrassment factor, right? Like the league investigated them getting Kawhi in the first place in 2019. And that was, didn't find anything. And now it's like, I find it really hard to believe that signing Kawhi was on the up and up, given the requests at the time and given what we've seen that Kawhi got for staying in with the Clippers. I think I also think one of the things that the league should probably do here, especially if they find anything untoward with Kawhi, is probably go back and look at all of the Clippers signings over the last few years, because Nick Batum, I would argue, was well below market value, especially, back a few years ago. I think Ivica Zubac is vastly underpaid, and that's been interesting to watch. They got Miles Plumlee for a lower, at the time, Adrian Wojnarowski reported that Plumlee took less from the Clippers than he was being offered elsewhere. So it's a situation here where, you can maybe extend this around the league, but certainly here with the Clippers, that I think the league kind of owes it to all the teams that have been competing against the Clippers here, looking out to see how many trees Zubac may have gotten away with not planting,
Well, and the other part that the owners really care about is this affects their money, right?
Yes.
Because if Kawhi or these other Clipper players were not signing for more money, and obviously if you're, there is a cap and there's the first apron and stuff. So like, it's not like a zero-sum game necessarily in terms of if that money isn't going in. Like it's giving them a competitive advantage to spend the money elsewhere with other players and retain some of these guys. But there had to be some level of money that was not going into the luxury tax because of this. And whatever that amount of money was, that was supposed to be split with the pool of owners. And when you play with the owners, like one thing we've learned about the owners through the various lockouts and the various changes throughout the league over the last few decades, especially as there's been this influx of new ownership and venture capital and all that stuff, like, these guys don't like their money being played with, and that's even been, I think, a hurdle for expansion has been that now you have to cut the pie with 32 teams rather than 30, and like they don't want to cut the pie with 32 teams unless the buying in price is at just a ridiculous level that they couldn't turn it down. So like you mess with owners' money, and that's when now all of a sudden it stops being a fraternity and it starts being like, you owe me. and you need to penalize them, because again, if they don't penalize them, to your initial question, like now it's a free for all, and that still favors the Clippers. Like Steve Ballmer is by far the richest owner in the league. He's the richest owner in sports. He's the sixth richest person in the world. So it's like, I just think it's a slippery slope of, kind of reminds me of like doping in cycling, where they're always the drugs are always one step ahead of the testing. And you just got to be careful. That I still think if we just get rid of all the rules and it doesn't matter and you can pay anybody, that like it will help the Lakers for sure, because they are the Lakers and they have the history and the brand and just they're the Lakers. But Steve Ballmer then can, like, he's got however much money he has, and he could, like, I just think you got to be careful with that.
Yeah. Well, Jovan, this has been a real blast. I'm going to stick around and answer a couple of the super comments here. Quick reminder to everybody, I'm only going to be here for a few more minutes. So as soon as Jovan jumps, go and tune in to Jovan's show, Buha's Block, where he is going to be doing a Q&A that airs in 5 minutes. So Jovan, thank you very much for hopping on. Anything else that you want to plug before we get you out of here?
No, just excited for the season. Excited to pod together. We'll have to do the Great Western Forum soon here at some point, season preview. But no, just at Jovan Buha on all social platforms and Buha's Block wherever you get your podcasts.
The People's Insider, my personal favorite beat reporter for a few years running now. Have a good one, man.
Appreciate it.
All right, I am going to dive on into your guys' super comments, starting with the most important sound on the show. First question here comes from John Drake, who asks, Keegan Murray is the ideal fit. So Sacramento is a really interesting situation here, and I'm glad, John, that you mentioned Keegan Murray. Sacramento is really interesting in that their roster makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever, and it's also incredibly expensive. And if there's one thing an owner will not sign off on, it's a shitty team that costs a lot of money. And so watch for them over the course of the summer, because it's the exact kind of roster that teams usually employ right before they start selling off pieces. And start outright tanking. They have way too many guards. There's just no roster balance. They aren't going to be able to play any defense. They're going to struggle. And at some point this season, they're going to ask themselves, which pieces could we trade right now that would bring us back the most bang for their buck? And I think Murray is probably pretty high up on that list. So, and they also probably want to trade him like this. It's the Kings are the kind of roster to where, like, they will be so bad, a stink will be applied to the rest of the guys on that roster. And if a stink gets applied to Keegan Murray and his price drops too far, well, that impacts the way that you're able to rebuild as well. So I do like the notion of Keegan Murray. He's a really good shooter, a pretty good defender. Has some of the same issues that Rui does. But at the end of the day, like, if the Lakers want to go with somebody maybe a little younger or who's just slightly smaller, Murray is a pretty good pick. All right, next question here comes from Drip Show, who writes, if the Clippers don't get punished, will this open Mark Walter's eyes? I absolutely think it will. And Jovan and I talked about it a second ago. The reason that this would be such a crazy advantage for the Lakers specifically is because they have better relationships with sponsors than just about any other team in the league. They are the most marketable presence in the sport. They, when the Lakers are good, they're an economy unto themselves that everybody wants to be a part of. Every sponsor wants to be a part of. So, like, basically, if at that point, if teams get to basically completely circumvent that cap and line up sponsorship deals with, and basically you need to find as many sponsorships on the up and up as you possibly can. Well, then that creates that huge advantage there for the Lakers. I want to be absolutely clear. It's not what I'm rooting for. I've talked about this on the show. I think baseball has really suffered from the way that the Dodgers have kind of dominated things. And I think baseball really kind of suffered from that time when like only the Red Sox and Yankees seem to matter. I think the Dodgers being introduced into that group and category of team has helped to a certain extent, but now they're just so overwhelming at this point and so dominant, especially in most regular seasons. Like this has been a bad regular season, and they're probably still going to win their division. They're going to get into the playoffs, and they'll probably be the most dangerous team in the playoffs that nobody is going to want to play. And this is in a down season. This is in a frustrating season. So I don't know that, and like Matt made the point that like a lot of people just want to watch the Lakers win. I kind of disagree. I just think he has a lot of experience with Lakers fans who feel that way. But like we saw it kind of with the Warriors where there was a novelty to how good they were for a little bit, but had that carried forward, I think everybody, by the time Kevin Durant finally got out of there, I think that the story there had kind of turned and everybody was just pretty sick of that, how good they were, how overwhelming they were, that it was just like, all right, enough. Let's move on here. But if the Lakers basically start running like the Dodgers and they can circumvent the cap and they can acquire superstars in the way that the Lakers have been able to eat to an even greater extent than the Lakers have been able to acquire superstars, I do think eventually there would be some fatigue there, and I don't think that would be good for the league. And I don't really want to. I saw you guys writing in the chat. I think it's a perfectly fair thing. I also want to win fairly. I want to show that I could beat all of these other teams. The Lakers do have some advantages that these other teams don't, but they built those advantages. I don't want to like win by just circumventing the cap and being able to just outspend everybody. I don't think that's all that fun. Quick reminder, Jovan's show is about to stream. I have one more super comment here that I'm going to get to, and then hope you guys go and check out that show. Actually, this works out well. Drip Show. By the way, love the Great Western Forum. We need more. We are, like Pete, Jovan, and I are actually putting our heads together, not just on Great Western Forum shows that we like, the one that we've already done. We want to get back to doing those on a more regular basis, at least monthly. But Odyssey has actually given us the go-ahead on designing a live Great Western Forum that we would, I would make the trip out to LA to do that there with Pete, with Jovan, with special guests, all of that good stuff. So keep an eye out for more information on that. And then obviously keep an eye out for those Great Western Forum episodes when Jovan, Pete, and our guests all get the opportunity to record them. All right, that is going to do it here for this episode of the Lakers Lounge podcast. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, not just today, but over the course of the week. It's been a really good, productive week. Weird week, obviously, given the news and stuff like that. Let's see. So I will be back on Sunday, probably sometime in the afternoon, because the Lakers or the Vikings play the night game. So get your questions in the form of a 5-star review to iTunes, and I'll definitely get to those questions. Otherwise, I'll send out a request on Twitter, and then you guys can ask questions here in the live chat while we stream that show. And until then, thanks to Jovan. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and I will talk to you guys on Sunday. Have a great rest of your weekend. Make somebody else's, and I will talk to you when I talk to you. Have a good one, everybody.